I'm Eliza Leone. I'm the registered dietitian and wellness manager with Restaurant Associates at Harvard Medical School. We do all the food service on the medical school campus here. And we have a special guest in our background helping out with the Zoom. Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Chris Sotilli. Along with Eliza, we are proud to have been on campus now for coming up on 18 years at the medical school. I'm the general manager and I support a relatively large but diverse team of folks that do campus catering in the conference center. And we provide the food service in Elements, Courtyard, Atrium, Aliquots cafes, and Countway Connections in the Countway Library. We're really excited and we're thankful for you joining us this evening.
So our class tonight, what we are making is a Southwestern-inspired dish. So there's a lot of those types of flavors in here. I'll point those out as we go through the recipe. But we're making a spiced sautéed shrimp dish. And I'll also talk about shrimp later on as we're dealing with that ingredient. And we're making some brown rice with tomatoes and black beans and some seared green beans with a cilantro lime vinaigrette. So we have lots of different flavors in here. And the theme with this recipe, February is American Heart Month. So I wanted to show you lots and lots of different ways that you can get tons of flavor without adding a ton of salt or saturated fat like butter. We don't need those things to get a ton of flavor in these dishes. So up front, something about food safety before we start. Since we are dealing with shrimp, wanted to talk about that a little bit. So we're going to be cooking the shrimp. It cooks very, very quickly. We're going to be cooking it to an internal temperature of 145 degrees. That is the safe temperature to cook shrimp to. So if you have a thermometer, you can keep that handy. But if not, you can always just cut a shrimp open, make sure it looks all like uniform color, or just trust that it cooks very quickly, only 2 to 3 minutes per side. So let's see. Also, if your shrimp was frozen, the best, safest way to thaw anything that's frozen is to thaw it in your refrigerator. Put it in the fridge overnight and let it come to fridge temperature instead of freezer temperature. If you were rushing to unfreeze your shrimp to thaw it out, you can put it in a sink in a strainer with running water, constantly running water until the shrimp has thawed out and is no longer frozen. Let's see. Also wanted to make sure everybody washed their produce, even your limes or anything that you're not eating the peel of. Your knife goes all the way through that. So it brings any potential bacteria all the way through the inside. So make sure you wash everything that you're using, all the produce. And let's see what else. Our knife, I always talk about this. Dull knife is more dangerous than a sharp knife because if it's not sharp, it doesn't get a good grip on the food. If it's dull, it can slip and cut your finger. So make sure your knife is nice and sharp. And of course, make sure you're careful around the heat. Have an oven mitt or a towel handy so you don't burn yourself. And with that, I'm going to get us into the recipe here. So our plan of work, that's the order that we're making everything tonight. We're going to start with making our rice because that takes the longest to cook. Start with our rice. Then while the rice is on the burner, we're going to prepare some of the other ingredients, make our spice mix for the shrimp. We're going to pick the ends off of our green beans. We're going to do all that stuff. And then we're going to cook our green beans and then we cook the shrimp in the end. And then we have a final dish. So I'm going to start with this onion. I'm going to cut this onion. I'm going to dice it. So I wanted to show what the onion looks like at first. So this is a good example. This one has a big root on it. This is the root end, and this is the stem end. So when you're cutting an onion, you don't want to cut off the root end. You want to cut off the stem end because the root helps to keep it all together. All those layers in the onion wants to fall apart, but the root keeps it together. So I'm just going to peel off some of the papery outside if I can. And I'm going to cut off that stem end first. Just a little bit. I'm going to compost that. And then I'm going to cut this in half. So the root end is staying connected to the rest of it, but I'm slicing that root in half. So you'll see all those layers, they all come to a head right at the root. So we don't want to lose that. We don't want to cut that off. Now that I've cut this in half, I'm going to peel off the outer papery layer. And sometimes even the outer layer of the actual onion, it can be like a little rubbery or kind of a different texture than the rest of the onion. So if you need to remove that, you can as well. So this is the special chef way to dice an onion. I learned this from our chef, so of course I am not, maybe I'm not as good as him. I know he does this way faster than I do. But we're gonna put this down and we're gonna slice this way first. We're gonna work with the layers, the natural layers of the onion are gonna help us to dice this onion. So I just sliced it, but not all the way through. Again, I left it still connected at the root. Next, we have the root here. We're gonna go this way. Again, don't slice all the way through the root. You want to keep that root connected. There we go. And now this final cut is gonna do the dice. And it just falls apart into perfectly little diced pieces. And when you end up with this root that you didn't get to cut through, you can just sort of roughly chop that up. You don't need to throw this away. We can save as much of it as possible. And all you throw away is this tiny little bit. And by throw away, I mean compost. I have my compost bin right next to me. So look, we have all these diced pieces. The natural layers in the onion cause this piece to break up into multiple pieces. So we're letting the onion do part of the work. I'm going to do the same with the other half. And this trick does take practice. I definitely, the first time I did this, had no idea what I was doing. It takes practice, but it saves you work. There's a reason that chefs do this. They do this because it's most efficient. So it saves you time. So again, we cut this way toward the root. So we have two pieces. Then we cut this way. And now we do the final cut. And chop up what's left on the root. Oof, this onion is pretty powerful. My eyes are not watering, but they're almost watering. All right, and any other pieces that look like they might be a little big, you can just roughly chop those up, but this looks good to me. So this was probably a medium-sized onion. We don't need this much. If you had just a small onion, that's plenty for what we're going to use this for. So I'm pushing the onion to the side. And what I'm going to do now is bring my burner over here. Because we're going to start with the rice. Okay, so I'm going to put this on medium heat. I've got just a regular old saucepan. And I'm going to add a little bit of canola oil. In the recipe, I think it says like 2 tablespoons, but you can just eyeball it. When I was mentioning fat before, saturated fat, oils like canola oil and olive oil are unsaturated fat, which is actually essential for us to eat. So you don't have to be so worried about how much you add. So I'm going to add my onion in here. And I have some extra onion that I think I might not use because I don't think I need all of this. So I'm going to set this aside. Use that for another dish. And I have my onion in here, and I'm also going to be adding my dry brown rice. So right now it's just canola oil, onion, and brown rice. And I've got the heat on medium. So I'm going to be tossing this around without any liquid in there yet, because I want to toast the rice a little bit. Whole grains like brown rice already have like a kind of a toasted, like nutty flavor. But if you can toast them a bit more before you add the liquid that starts to really break it down, you help to develop the flavor before you even really start cooking it. This works well with any kind of whole grain like quinoa, with barley, farro, bulgur wheat. They all toast really nicely. Some of them need to toast a bit longer than others, but you'll start to smell the toasted scent coming off of it. So we're just gonna, let this sit here, stir it around a bit for just a few minutes. So we're using a whole grain, everyone always, you always hear that whole grains are better for you. The reason for that is because whole grains have a lot more nutrients than processed white grains. So if you're comparing brown rice to white rice, for example, white rice has been processed. So like a grain, you can kind of think of a grain, one grain as like an onion with the layers. When you're eating white rice, the outer layers are removed. And even the inner germ inside the grain is also removed. So when grains are processed, you're losing the heart healthy fat, you're losing the fiber, you're losing the protein, you're losing all the B vitamins, you're losing so many essential nutrients just to save yourself some, to allow yourself to put the rice on your shelf for a longer time or to make it slightly faster to cook. So if you can go with whole grains, they might take a bit longer to cook, but I mean, you'll see that this brown rice is going to cook in less than the time it takes to finish this whole dish. And I think it's got better flavor too. White rice doesn't really have a whole lot of flavor, honestly. But brown rice, like I said, whole grains are like nutty, toasted. They have really great flavors. All right, so that's smelling to me like it's toasted. So what I'm going to do at this point is add the tomatoes. So I'm using canned tomatoes, diced tomatoes with the juice. So the tomato juice that comes from the can is going to be a part of the liquid that helps to cook this rice. So this is, try and pour this without making a big mess. This is one 15-ounce can, like your average size can that you would get at a grocery store. So I'm stirring that in, and I'm also adding 1 cup of water. You could add stock if you prefer instead of water. However, because we're talking about sodium in this class, we are just adding water. But that's not to say that we don't want any salt at all, because salt does act as a flavor enhancer. So in the recipe, I think we had a quarter teaspoon of salt at this stage. So I'm just going to add that. And a little bit of black pepper as well, about 1/8 teaspoon. A general rule is that you typically want to add half the amount of black pepper that you added of salt. So I'm stirring this in, and now that the liquid is in here, I'm turning this up to high to bring it to a boil. So this is the familiar step with rice. You bring it to a boil and then you lower it to a simmer. So I have an induction burner. It usually goes pretty quickly, but I'm gonna let this come to a boil first. So the canned tomatoes, some canned tomatoes already have salt added to them. And if that's the case, you don't actually need to add any salt to this step. But the tomatoes that we used do not have salt. And some tomatoes also have, like, some canned tomatoes, I should say, have lots of other ingredients added to them. But, you know, regular old tomatoes with nothing added are super flavorful and delicious. So no need to buy the kind that has extra things, extra salt or, you know, garlic or basil, even though those flavors are good. We don't need them. You can just get plain tomatoes. So we also have black beans that we're gonna be putting into this dish, but not yet. These are canned, low sodium canned black beans that were drained and rinsed. We're not gonna be adding those just yet because we don't want them to get like super mushy. We're gonna wait until the rice is a bit more cooked and then we'll add the beans later on. So this is starting to come to a boil. Barbara, how are you all doing? Good? Okay. All right. So I've got another burner down the other end because I'm going to need to use this. I'm going to scooch my rice over there and put a lid on it and turn it down to low and let it simmer. All right, so my rice is going and we'll check on that periodically. So now I'm going to set my burner aside and we're going to do a little bit more food prep here. So this, I made a nice little spice display to show you all. These are all the spices that we're using in the shrimp. Lots of different colors here. The colors are kind of muted over this camera, unfortunately, but I'm going to point them out to you. Garlic powder is the white one. Paprika is the bright red one. Then coriander and cumin are these brown ones. And then this sort of orangey one is chili powder. And in the middle there are dried oregano. So we've got like little dried leaves in there. So we're adding all of these spices to our shrimp. You'll notice none of these are salt. We don't need salt to create flavor. These are all spices that are commonly used in Southwestern cooking and really a lot of other cultures of cooking as well. Paprika and cumin are spices that I feel like I use in a lot of our classes here. But that's because they're delicious and they complement a lot of different flavors. So these are going to work really well with the shrimp. And what I'm going to do now, so I have this little bowl here. I'm going to grab a big mixing bowl that we're going to end up using for the shrimp. I'm just going to toss the spices in here and mix them around just to combine them. If you have any like clumpy pieces, you can break those up. Those clumpy pieces happen when, if you have your spice container and you go over a pot of steaming rice or something and you shake your spice and the steam goes up into the container and moisture gets inside and it causes clumps. So the best practice is really to put your spices like into your hand and then put it in, rather than putting your open spice container over this steaming pot of rice. Then you don't get those giant clumps in there. All right, so this is all mixed together. I'm going to set this aside until we're ready for the shrimp. So this part's done. And next, we're going to be making our vinaigrette. So this vinaigrette is made, I'm making it with a food processor, but you don't have to. I'm going to use this little baby food processor I brought from home. But if you don't have a food processor, that's totally fine. You can just make sure you mince up the ingredients, mince up the cilantro and garlic nice and small. And it'll, have the exact same flavor. So, all right, actually, let me keep this. So I've got my food processor ready. As I have the ingredients ready, and I'm going to put them right in here. So the first ingredient we're doing in this vinaigrette is cilantro. Cilantro can be a really dirty herb, so you got to make sure you wash it very well. But what's cool about using a food processor for sauces like this is that you don't have to worry about pulling the leaves off the stems. We're literally just going to chop this whole thing up, including the stems, and put it right in there. So we're chopping only to break it up into smaller pieces. And then the food processor does the rest of the work. So very easy, putting that in the food processor now. And that goes for any kind of leafy herbs. I wouldn't say any herb because rosemary has a really, rosemary and thyme have like very, like, you know, kind of like their stems are more like sticks. So they're very tough. So those ones might not be as good to put into a food processor, but like parsley, basil, cilantro, these ones are nice and soft, so they break up easily. We're also going to be doing 1 garlic clove. I'm just going to cut this little root end off. And this is raw garlic, so depending on how much you like that flavor, you may want to go more or less, but this is just 1, you know, small garlic clove. Just going to chop this into a few pieces and throw that in there. Next, we're using some lime juice. So the recipe calls for, so I'm just going to slice this in half and then we can juice it. But the recipe calls for, I think, 2 tablespoons of lime juice. But this, I think it comes to be like 1.5 limes or something. So I'm going to use both of these halves. If you have a juicer, limes are kind of hard to juice by hand because they have so much moisture in there and the skin is already so thin compared to a lemon or an orange that it's kind of hard for you to be able to squeeze it enough. So you'll be able to see over in the view of me instead of the view of the cutting board. I'm squeezing this and it's coming right out of the juicer. It's way easier to use a juicer. And you may have noticed that when I put this in the juicer, I didn't put it this way, even though that's the shape that it seems like it should go that way. I put the cut side down because the holes are on the bottom and the juice comes out of this side. So I'm putting those together and we're squishing it down, even though it seems like the shapes don't make sense. They do. It makes it way easier. All right, so I have juiced 2 halves so far, and I'm just going to cut this other lime in half. And I'm going to juice the 3rd half, so that gives me about 2 tablespoons of lime juice. Going straight into the food processor here. And then we also have, this is an opportunity to add salt and pepper if you would like. The lime juice and the garlic and the cilantro are all such strong flavors that, again, you do not need salt. You don't need added salt in any part of this dish. However, I'm adding a little bit because of my personal taste preferences, and a little bit of black pepper as well. And the last thing we need to add is olive oil. So the recipe calls for about 2 tablespoons. I'm gonna eyeball it. And we always talk about this in our classes. We're of course gonna taste test this to make sure we like it and see if it needs anything else. So I'm gonna put my top on here and blend this up now. All right. This looks beautiful. I'm gonna grab a tasting spoon and taste this. So we didn't need the cilantro to be like completely pureed. All we need is for it to be broken up mostly. So you can easily do this with a knife if you don't have a food processor. So I'm just gonna taste this. That's delicious. Yeah, so many good flavors in there. So I'm gonna set this aside until we need it. Move my food processor. All right, and the next thing we're gonna do, actually, let me check on my rice first. If you're cooking along, I encourage you to do the same and give it a stir. It's looking good. It definitely still has liquid in there. So I'm just gonna let it keep boiling. And we're gonna check on it again in a little bit, and that will be the time when we add the black beans. So what we are doing at this point, I'm just checking my list to make sure I'm on track. I have all these green beans here. The recipe calls for 1 pound of green beans. This is not quite 1 pound, but you know, following the recipe, you can do that much or not, whatever you choose. So what I'm looking for, I'm spreading out the green beans here. And I'm looking for any of them that still have this little stem on them. This stem is really tough, so you want to make sure you take that off before you cook it. The other end of the bean doesn't have that stem, so you don't have to worry about that, but this is where it grew off of the plant, so it's pretty tough. So what you can do is, I want to show the contrast. You can line up. I'm going to look for all the beans that have a little stem still on them. You can line them all up. See if I have any more. Most of these don't have the stem on it, so that makes it easier, but I've got these all here and I could pull them off one by one, or for efficiency's sake, just lay them in a little bundle and chop those off. This makes it go faster. You can also check if you have any other beans that have like, you know, that maybe don't look so nice on one end, maybe a little bit dried or brown. You can chop those off if you feel like you'd like to. But I'm just doing a quick scan to make sure there's nothing that I missed here. One more end. And what's cool about these is if you do want to rip the stem off by hand, it just pops right off. Very, very, very effortless. It's kind of fun too. I remember when I was a kid, my mom used to steam green beans all the time, and she would assign me or one of my siblings to pick all the ends off the green beans. So that feeling of pulling the stem off is like a nostalgic thing for me. So these green beans are all prepped. I'm going to set them aside. And let's see. All right. So at this point, I'm going to toss the shrimp in the spice mix, and we're going to add a little bit of lime juice as well, because citrus helps to neutralize like fishy flavors. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to grab the bowl of the spice mix that we already had. All these spices here. And I'm going to take shrimp. So I've got this shrimp here covered in plastic, so I'll remove that. And again, the recipe calls for 1 pound of shrimp to make the, 4 to 6 servings, but I'm not going to make all of that today. But I am going to dump this shrimp in here. This shrimp has been thawed, like I said. I'm going to put this shrimp bowl somewhere else. Okay, so I have gloves on. This is a little bit easier for me, but if you would like to use tongs, or you can use your hands, I'm going to start tossing the shrimp in the spices here. And we've got plenty of spice to coat all these shrimp. So these shrimp have the tail still on them. And I wanted to talk about, you see that a lot in restaurants, and they're sold that way in the grocery store. I wanted to talk about why that is. One reason is that it just looks nicer. It's like a prettier display with a little fancy shrimp tail sticking up. However, there is a functional reason too, which is that so looking at this shrimp here, there's, the top of the shrimp here is much thicker. Kind of hard to see, I'll do it against the white. This part of the shrimp is much thicker than this part of the shrimp. So the functional reason to leave that tail on, that like shell tail on there, is to prevent that really skinny little part of the shrimp from drying out. So it takes a bit longer to cook this thick part, and we don't want the bottom skinny part to dry out in the meantime. So that's a big reason why you see that. All right, so I'm going to take off my gloves, and I'm going to wash my hands. And I encourage you, if you're cooking along, to do the same. Wash your hands before you touch anything else. All right, how are we doing on time? Looking good.
Hey Eliza, we have a question from Nancy.
Oh, sure.
Nancy asked, does the shrimp cook well with the tail? Because she's always removed the tail in the past.
Does it cook well with the tail?
Correct, that's the question.
Yeah, because that outer shell is so thin, the heat is still able to get through and cook that tail. You will want to, you won't ever cook, I shouldn't say you won't ever, but most of the time you don't cook shrimp with the entire shell still on. Because that, like I said, that upper part is much thicker, so it takes more heat to go through the shell and through that thick part of the shrimp. But because the tail is so skinny, you only need a little bit of heat coming through to cook that part. So it will still cook, definitely. It's a good question. But you know what? I also, when I practiced this recipe and wrote this recipe, I used shrimp that didn't have the tail on it. And I didn't feel like the tail was overcooked. I didn't feel like it dried out. If you talk to a chef, like our executive chef might say something different, but for the average home cook, it's perfectly fine, either way. So we've got this, and like I said, we're going to use a little bit of lime juice, the citrus juice. We have another lime half that we cut before. Citrus juice helps to neutralize the fishy flavor, like I said. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that on top. I don't want to go crazy with the juice because I don't want to wash all the spices off that we just put on there. So I'm just going to do a little bit. And we're going to set this aside to let it marinate, basically. It's just going to sit with the spices for just a short while until we need it again. All right. So now I'm going to add the black beans. I'm going to bring the rice over here so you can see what it looks like. So there's still water in there. It's hard to see, but down at the bottom, you might be able to see the liquid that's still cooling down there. There is still liquid in there. It's not completely done cooking, but it's getting pretty close. So I'm gonna, at this point, dump in my 1 cup of black beans. And mix that all up. So I was talking earlier about whole grains and how the brown rice has more protein, more fiber, more heart healthy fats. The same, all that can be said about beans. So adding black beans to this dish, to this rice, is just making it even more satisfying, even more nutrient rich. We're adding different textures, we're adding a different color in here. We're just making this more overall, more satisfying overall, physically and psychologically.
Barbara, how's the dynamic duo doing over there?
My rice isn't quite as done as yours.
Okay,
Okay.
that's fine. We still have,
I just tasted
like
it. It's
20
a little bit chewy still, so.
yeah.
But everything else looks great. And I also know why you need a small food processor.
Yeah, I mean,
I only had a big one that's 40 years old, so.
you're probably like,
It doesn't really pulse everything up very good, but it'll be good. It smells delicious.
Yeah, that vinaigrette is so good. It's funny, so I have this small food processor. I don't even have a big one at home. I only have the tiny one. So sometimes the tiny one can be annoying. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's annoying.
Yeah, when you're making a carrot cake, they come in handy.
Yeah,
You have a big
Okay.
one.
exactly. All right, I'm gonna stick the rice back on the burner and put the lid back on it. So now what we're gonna do is move on to the green beans. So we've got our green beans here that we picked. We picked the stems off. We picked off any impurities or blemishes from our green beans. And I'm gonna bring the burner back over here. So you can see what I'm doing. So we are going to be searing these green beans. Searing, the process of searing something means to bring the pan up to a pretty high heat. Like wait until it's fully heated and then add the food in there. And when you add that, it's gonna sizzle and it gets like a nice, like kind of black char on it. I've talked in the past and I feel like probably most of our classes, I talk about how good it tastes to char vegetables. It's just such a great and easy way, you know, if you roast vegetables, if you sear them, whatever you do to develop that char, it's such an easy way to add flavor without adding salt. Like I keep saying, all of these other things, all these other spices and cooking methods, and there are so many other ways to develop flavor in your dishes without needing to add salt. A lot of restaurants also will finish their dishes. They always finish with butter. So like pull something out of the oven nice and hot, put it on the plate, and then they put a big pat of butter on it before they send it to your table, and the butter melts away before you even get it, so you don't even know it's there. But they say, finish everything with butter because it makes everything better. Sure, not saying butter is bad. Of course, butter is delicious. However, there are lots and lots of ways to make your food delicious without needing to add that butter or salt or other nutrients that can have, you know, some negative effects on your health if you have too much of them. So I'm going to get the green beans searing here, and then I'm going to talk a bit more about some of the heart health stuff. So yeah, we're about 40 minutes, a little over 40 minutes into our class. And we're basically almost done. All we have to do is sear the green beans and saute the shrimp, and that's it. So I've got this on medium. Like I said, this induction burner cooks very quickly and it's like gets super hot. So I have it on medium, but you may want it a bit higher, a bit lower, depending on what kind of burner you have. I'm adding canola oil because canola oil can get hotter than olive oil can without getting smoky. So I'm just going to let this oil heat up a bit. And I'm going to have my tongs ready for the green beans. That makes it way easier to toss them around. All right. And you know your oil is hot when it starts to, when you tip your pan and it slides right across very quickly like water. That means it's nice and hot. All right. And unfortunately, Zoom thinks that the sizzle is background noise, so it filters it out, so you won't hear it, which is a shame because it's a very satisfying sound. Yeah, that's great. So I'm adding all the green beans in here. It's okay that they're not all touching the bottom at the same time because I'm going to be tossing them around. This is a non-stick pan. If you have a non-stick pan, that is the best thing to use for something like this, for searing something. Or if you have a cast iron pan, that's also a great option. But, you know, I used a cast iron pan for the last class when we made shakshuka. But you have to be very careful about keeping it, you know, seasoned to make it non-stick. So if you want to just purchase a pan that's already non-stick, that also makes it easier. All right. So I wanted to talk a bit about shrimp. So this quarter, so we always have, whether or not we talk about what our theme is for our class, there is an overarching theme that inspires these recipes. And the theme that we have for this quarter is the Mediterranean diet. So I did talk about that in our last class with the shakshuka, but also, you know, even though we're making a Southwestern dish, it still fits the Mediterranean diet guidelines, which is, you know, mostly plants. Seafood is a big part of the protein, the foods that provide protein in the Mediterranean diet. So shrimp is just one great example. When we're talking about heart health, sizzling pretty loud. So Chris, let me know if my audio gets messed up at all. When we're talking about heart health, you oftentimes hear, you know, people talk about fatty fish like salmon or trout or sardines or mackerel or things like that, that are, you know, fish that have a great amount of unsaturated fat. But seafood, or sorry, shrimp, even though it does not have a lot of fat, it's basically just protein in 3 ounces of cooked shrimp. So that's, you know, like 3 ounces of meat is essentially the size of a deck of cards. So you can imagine, you know, shrimp that fits into that, probably like 3 of these shrimp, maybe 4. You have, you know, 80 or 90 calories and 20 grams of protein. No carbohydrates, no fat, just like a teeny smidge of fat, but mostly it's just protein. It's like pure protein. So that's a really great thing about shrimp. Also, shrimp is one example, but a lot of different kinds of shellfish tend to be higher in dietary cholesterol. So like they have cholesterol. When you eat that, you are eating dietary cholesterol. But there has been a lot of research about, you probably, you know, the whole thing of like, are eggs actually good for you to eat or not? Like eggs have high cholesterol, are they bad for me? That whole question. So there's been a lot of research about this, and it's been decided, it's been, you know, studied. Hearing very quickly. It's been studied and observed that only people that have like heart disease or type 2 diabetes or other, you know, cardiac related, you know, diagnoses should be concerned about the dietary cholesterol they eat. If you are a healthy person, if your blood pressure and your cholesterol are around, you know, around the normal amount, then there's no reason to worry about the dietary cholesterol you eat. Dietary cholesterol, so eating foods that are high in cholesterol, is not a direct path to the amount of cholesterol in your blood. What is basically a direct path to the amount of cholesterol in your blood is saturated fat. Saturated fat is not found in seafood. So even though shrimp and other types of seafood, other types of shellfish are high in dietary cholesterol, they have no saturated fat. So that's why seafood is seafood, even if it's higher in dietary cholesterol, seafood is a healthier option than land animal meat, because land animal meat has saturated fat. Fish and shellfish and seafood does not have saturated fat. Anything that lives in the water only gives you unsaturated fat. And the unsaturated fat is a good time. All right, this one has a really good sear on it. You can see that. Kind of blurry, but I keep on tossing this around because I don't want the bottom ones to get burned and the top don't get any. But this is looking really good. So the Mediterranean diet, like I was saying, the Mediterranean diet has been studied and observed to lead, you know, people that follow the Mediterranean diet have much lower likelihood of developing any type of cardiac issues like heart disease or even type 2 diabetes or even cognitive decline later in life, you know, Alzheimer's disease, memory loss, all that stuff. People that tend to eat, you know, that fill their plate with a lot of plants and that eat seafood as their main protein source have, you know, better health outcomes later in life. That's what the Mediterranean diet has. So these green beans, green beans can be eaten raw. So you can just cook them as long as you want to cook them for. They don't need to get like super soft. All we really wanted was for them to develop some color on them. And you can still eat them nice and crispy if you like. I'm gonna keep them on there just a little bit longer. Because we're also adding, talking about unsaturated fats, we have to throw in some walnuts, of course. These are a great source of omega-3 fats, which are one of the best sources of the type of fat that helps, like I was talking about, preventing memory loss and preventing cognitive decline later in life. Omega-3 fats are the way to do that. So I don't want these to burn. So I'm gonna just really toss them in there real quick, mix them around, and then we're gonna pull the green beans out and set them aside. Omega-3 fats are also anti-inflammatory. That's a trendy term being thrown around, anti-inflammatory diet and all that. Omega-3 fats are anti-inflammatory. That means that if you have enough omega-3 fats in your system, if you have been eating enough omega-3s from walnuts, olive oil, avocado, things like that, then they help to fight off inflammation that can arise within your body. All right, so these are good to go, but we still have to do the shrimp. So I'm just gonna put these in a bowl off to the side. The temperature of the green beans doesn't matter quite as much as the temperature of the shrimp. So that's why we're cooking the shrimp last. If you had another burner and you wanted to put these on the back on a low burner, like on the lowest heat, just to keep them warm, then you can do that. But I'm just gonna set these aside in a bowl. All right. And now I'm gonna do the shrimp. So I'm gonna use the same pan because it's a nice nonstick pan. Actually, before I move on, Barbara, how are you doing over there? Or if there's anybody else that's cooking along. You're on mute.
Right on target.
Oh, look at you. Perfect. So we're moving on to the shrimp. Okay, so I've got this again on medium, but again, my burner tends to run a little bit hot, so I might need to turn it down. And I'm adding a bit more canola oil again. Don't want to go crazy with it, but a little bit. And we have our shrimp with all the spices on it. And I'm going to use, I want to make sure that I have the shrimp all in a single layer. So this is different than the green beans. The green beans, we could toss them around. The shrimp you can too. But the best way to, especially if you're cooking shrimp for the first time, or if you're not very familiar with it, the best way to keep on top of how the shrimp is cooking is to keep it in a single layer. So you can do 2 minutes one side, 2 minutes the other side, check the temperature, see how it goes, instead of losing track of which shrimp you already flipped and all that stuff. So I'm gonna dump the shrimp into the pan here. With another good civil pound. Hopefully I have enough room for everyone to be a single layer. Yeah, we're good. All right, so like I said, it only takes 2 or 3 minutes per side. Super easy to cook. So again, talking about, I mentioned in the beginning that canned tomatoes have a little bit of, they might have some salt added to them. The canned black beans, they are always, canned beans are in a salty brine. That's how they're preserved. So there is some salt in there. You can always buy the low sodium kind, but still there is some salt. And any kind of seafood will have some salt in it because it lives in salt water. So it lives in a brine essentially. So there is some salt naturally in shrimp, but that just goes to show again, we have some natural salt or some unavoidable salt in some of our other ingredients. So the added salt really just is not necessary. However, so I keep saying it's not necessary, but I also always want to encourage people to make sure you try you taste test things and make sure you know what you prefer. So if you do prefer things a bit saltier, you know, that's your preference. I would encourage you to practice using different kinds of flavorings like we've done today with the different spices and stuff. But of course, if you prefer something with a bit more salt, and everyone tells you salt is bad for you, don't add salt, and then that leads to you not enjoying your meal, that's not good either. Food, yes, food is meant to nourish you, but food is also meant to be enjoyed. So I'm flipping these over now, one by one. And if anyone is uncomfortable or unsure about cooking meat or seafood, I highly encourage you, if you don't have one, to buy a thermometer, because that seriously like puts all of your worries aside. If something is the temperature that it's supposed to be, then the guesswork is gone. So these are looking really good so far. I'm actually going to get my thermometer now. I'm gonna check. So the way you want to check the temperature of something is to stick the probe into the middle. So the probe here, stick the probe into the middle of the thickest part of what you're cooking. Don't stick it all the way through to the pan, because then you're taking the temperature of the pan. So I'm gonna find a nice fat shrimp and stick this right into the middle. And I'm looking for 145. That's the temperature for seafood. And that temperature is determined because it's the temperature that when this food reaches that temperature, any potentially hazardous bacteria was on this food when it was raw has been destroyed. I'm going to try another piece here. I'm getting up there, almost at 140. I'm at 138 right now. I'm going to try a few different pieces. And you got to make sure that you don't stick it all the way through to the pan, because that's an incorrect reading. Oh, this one in the middle is good to go. Yep. The one that I just checked 10 seconds ago is now ready. So that's how quickly this cooks. Yep, I've checked probably 6 pieces of shrimp, and they're all at about 148. So the shrimp is done. Very easy, very quick, very flavorful. And we got some nice, like, kind of blackened spots on there too. So really, really good. All right, I'm gonna move my burner out of the way, so then we can start assembling this dish. So I've got my favorite type of serving dish, which is I call it a bowl plate. I don't know what it's really called, maybe a pasta plate, but it's a plate with a little bit of a lip. So it just makes it easier to eat. This is my favorite. I always eat off of these at home. Got my rice. This pot is heavy because this is a dense dish here. So I'll show this to you. I'm mixing it all up. I'm checking the bottom to make sure there's no liquid. And it's all nice and dry, which is perfect. And we've mixed this up pretty well. So we've got, you know, the onion, the tomato, the black beans are all mixed in there. And the brown rice is like a nice orangey color now because the tomatoes. Time that we got 6:30 right on the dot. So I'm going to start with plating my rice here. Like I said, this brown rice and beans, there's so much protein, so much fiber. We've got 2 kinds of vegetables in here, the tomato and the onion. So no need to be afraid of eating rice. We've got this here. Got our green beans. I'm gonna sort of lay those over the top. And I have lots of walnuts on the bottom that I don't want to lose. Let's scoop all those up. Put those on top of the green beans. Make sure I get this nice seared green bean again. And we've got our delicious shrimp. So I'll put a few pieces of shrimp on here. Now, just a reminder to the shrimp tails, you need to take those off or you eat, unless you're my dad for some reason who just eats them. Don't know why. And we got our dressing. So this vinaigrette can go on everything on here. You can drizzle it over the green beans, which is what I'm gonna do, but you can also drizzle it over the entire dish. So I'm just gonna pour it over the green beans. I want a little bit more walnut. Yeah, gotta always have to have a crunchy topping on your dish is essential.
We're watching you finish up there, Barbara. We're watching you finish.
Right. How's it going, Barbara?
Good. I don't know how to show it to you.
Oh,
Can you lift up your plate or are you using a laptop?
I think you
Laptop
gotta
down.
put the,
Can you see it?
Oh, yeah.
There you go, right there.
Yeah, Chris, can you do the gallery view and then we can see everybody?
Yeah, I think so.
Hold on one sec, Barbara.
There we go.
Smells unbelievable.
yeah, it smells amazing.
That looks great.
That looks beautiful. It looks
That looks
exactly like mine.
fantastic.
It does look exactly like
Yeah.
yours.
You did a good job, Eliza.
Yay! I'm so happy.
There you go, ladies.
And now we have dinner.
There you go.
Perfect.
Your dinner, kid.
What a great evening activity. At 6:32, right, perfect dinner time. Got a fresh cooked meal. What's better than that?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all very, very much. We really, really appreciate you being here. We hope to see you again at future classes. You're all on our email list, so we'll send you any other classes that we have. And we appreciate you so much. Barbara, enjoy your meal.
I will. Thank
Nancy
you.
and Drew, have a
Thank you
great
for
night.
joining us. This was fantastic.
Thank you so
Nice.
much.
Good to see you, Chris. Take care, everyone.
Great job.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.